Do you love close, competitive college football matchups? Well, then Week 5 in the Big Ten Conference is for you, and we're previewing every single conference game within the league. This is the Week 5 preview here on Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Man, is there anything better than 6 minutes left, 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and you've got a one-possession college football game, and the game can sway on any given play? Man, that's what I live for. That's what I wake up on Monday for. That's why I go to work on Tuesday. That's why I make a living, so I can pay for a YouTube TV subscription to watch it all go down on Saturdays. I'm Big Ten Ted. Welcome to Big Nation. This is the Week 5 Big Ten football preview. Competitive football. That's all there is in the conference this weekend. Now, doesn't mean every single game is going to be a walk-off field goal or a 7-point matchup, but these are evenly matched contests, or at least that's what Vegas thinks. There are no double-digit favorites within the conference this week. The biggest spread, Ohio State is an 8.5-point favorite, going to the West Coast, going to Montlake, going to Washington this week. So I think we're in store for what could be an unforgettable weekend of college football. All right, we're set to get into Week 5. Before we do, Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Maryland, Purdue will not be mentioned. They are on a bye week this week. Without further ado, let's dive into the matchups. No Friday night game this week, so we begin on Saturday. Big noon kickoff is from Champaign, Illinois. Big noon Saturday. The featured matchup features the 21st ranked USC Trojans going on the road to Memorial Stadium in Champaign to face off against the 23rd ranked Illinois Fighting Illini. The Trojans are 6.5-point favorites. The over-under sits at 60.5 points. Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Gus Johnson, Joel Klatt, Jenny Taft, and the entire crew. Man, these are two teams, two fan bases that are feeling very different these days. Illinois started the season kind of floating right around the top 10. As recently as last week, they were inside the top 10 in the AP poll, whereas USC, they started the season outside of the AP poll, I believe. But USC just keeps on climbing, and everybody just in Trojan country keeps on feeling better and better and better about this team. And then Illinois, after that 53-point defeat at the hands of Indiana last week, well, maybe the feelings aren't exactly rainbows and unicorns in the state of Illinois this week. They had their fair share of injuries last week, and we're not sure where that's going to end up. We'll talk more about that as this preview progresses. But going back to USC, going back to Southern California, I mean, this offense just looks really good. They look really confident in what they're doing right now. It's one of the best offenses. It's one of the most efficient offenses right now in college football. And I talked about injuries for Illinois, but we know all about the experience coming back. It just maybe seems like there was a lot exposed last week for this Fighting Illini team. So you got two teams going in different directions, but what direction are they going to be going when this thing wraps up on Saturday? I think that is the big question. But you have this is the start of the stretch where we're going to find out more about USC. I think a big reason why everybody's feeling good, everybody's feeling positive, Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, Michigan State. Yeah, that'll make a lot of teams in the Big Ten feel pretty positive, especially when you have the talent that USC does. So we're going to find out a lot about USC to see where they stack up against a fairly good squad. But for Illinois, we're going to find out a lot about them, because how are they going to respond from last week? And that's where I want to get into really my second point in this preview is Indiana going to beat Illinois twice? Brett Bielema has to have his team focused and ready to go in front of the home crowd there in Champaign, because this is kind of a thing that could go two different directions for the Illini. This is a team that could come out and they could be pissed off, motivated, ready to prove that last week wasn't a fluke. Or they could let what happened last week kind of linger over against a USC team that has similar things to Indiana and how they can defeat this Illini squad. It was like, I was almost wowed. I had to double take so many times of what was happening in that Illinois-Indiana game, because that's not something we see very often from a Brett Bielema coach team. So the smart money might tell you that's not something that we see 2 weeks in a row, and Illinois will bounce back, but there's a lot to learn, I think, from this game. I think one thing when I was kind of looking at the matchups and looking at all of these things that really stood out to me, and I kind of mentioned, hey, USC's got some things that Indiana had that can take advantage of the matchups versus Illinois. Specifically, USC's passing game and USC's defensive line, I believe, are advantages for the Trojans over the Illini in this matchup. I mentioned the injuries before. The health of Illinois' secondary is a question mark. I believe Brett Bielema said this week, like 6 of their top 7 defensive backs were out at some point or another in that game against Indiana. And I think that's what kind of led to the big differential in points and what the final score read. I mean, he's like, I've never been through anything like that before, and that's tough. That's tough, especially when you have the secondary that they have. But we know Xavier Scott, he's not going to be able to go for a majority of the rest of the season. Miles Scott was out due to the targeting. Torrey Cox, Caleb Patterson, Matthew Bailey had some injuries. So we're just not sure of what the secondary is going to look like. I got a good feeling that we're going to see a lot of those guys back this week, but still we don't know. And you look at USC, they're the number 2 F+ offense in the country, and Jaden Mayava just looks like a totally different quarterback. Okay, who kidnapped a good quarterback and put him in a 14 jersey? I don't know. It certainly seems that way, but it goes to show you exactly what Lincoln Riley can do at the quarterback position. So considering what happened last week against Illinois secondary and the strength that USC has in the passing game, that's something that I believe USC can certainly exploit. But it sounds like Jacoby Lane may not be able to go. It looks like he was able to take the practice field out there on Tuesday, so that's certainly still up in the air. But you know Makai Lemon then. Without Jacoby Lane, Makai Lemon is going to be targeted early and often. He was mocked at the beginning of the year to be a first-round draft pick at wide receiver, and he has proven why thus far. He is dangerous when he gets the ball in space. He is an awesome receiver. I don't know if Illinois has a guy that can go man up on Makai Lemon right now. Without Jacoby Lane, I would expect Lake McCree to get a lot more looks this week, the tight end for USC. So that's kind of another matchup that Illinois certainly has to be able to keep their eyes on. Mayava leads the Big Ten in passing, over 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, and no interceptions. So all of that being considered, seems like a matchup advantage right now for USC. But what does Illinois need to do to be able to slow this down? Let's kind of tackle that. They need to unleash Gabe Ackus is what they need to do. He's got 3.5 sacks this season. He was a non-factor against Indiana, and he needs to be a factor. If he is a non-factor against USC, USC will win the game. I think that's a pretty simple thing to be able to say. On USC's offensive line, Elijah Page, their left tackle, left the game against Michigan State. Has not been seen at practice so far this week. So he's maybe a little less confident to go than Jacoby Lane is right now. After he went out of that game against Michigan State, there was a lot of musical chairs moving around parts to get this offensive line to work. So if Gabe Ackus can have a much better game against USC than he did against Indiana, that could certainly play in favor of Illinois. You need to get this USC offense a little bit off schedule. You need to make Jaden Mayava uncomfortable. When Mayava's kept clean, or I should say this, Mayava has been kept clean on 78% of his dropbacks this season, and he completes 76% of his passes when clean, but just 47% when under pressure, which kind of goes back to last season when he was under duress and he was kind of running around a little bit. He wasn't quite as efficient and wasn't as good. And we've seen that a little bit. Although he hasn't been under pressure much, we've seen it a little bit this season as well. I think a way to combat that, right, the pass rush, and if they can kind of win those battles against the USC offensive line for the Trojans, is to be able to run the ball. They've been running it really well this season. Illinois hasn't been defending it very well. Illinois has given up over 130 rushing yards per game. That's 13th in the Big Ten. Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders are a great combination, combined for nearly 700 yards and 5 touchdowns so far this season. So if you have a lot of aggressiveness coming off the edge, you can really slow that down with a great run game. And I think USC can get that run game going against Illinois. Now, you look to the flip side. I talked about how the passing game and the offense is maybe going to have an advantage for USC against Illinois. Let's head to the other side of the ball. This is a USC defensive line. They're playing really good right now, and they're really deep. Credit to their coaching staff, what they've been able to acquire, and also what they've been able to develop over there. You look at the Illini, an experienced offensive line, but right now it certainly just doesn't look like a good offensive line. They've given up 16 sacks through 4 games. They allowed 7 sacks versus Indiana. Now, that's a big number. A lot of numbers as it pertains to Illinois are inflated, but these other numbers, 9 sacks in 3 games allowed versus Western Illinois, Duke, and Western Michigan. So whether it's been higher caliber of competition like Indiana or lower caliber of competition, the offensive line hasn't really fared well either way. The Trojans have tallied 16 sacks this season. That's tied for most in the Big Ten. Braylon Shelby's got 3.5. Eric Gentry is just a beast. He leads the team in tackles as well with 27. Cameron Crawford, Anthony Lucas, they have over 2 sacks this season. I mean, Jakeem Stewart, every week we see a little bit more from Thanos and a little bit more and a little bit more of how he can wreak havoc on this defensive line. So Illinois' got to find a way to neutralize what this USC defensive line can really do up front. Because here's the thing about this. I don't think, Illinois is going to have a ton of success running the ball. Maybe they will, but it just doesn't seem like that matchup really plays in their favor to get Caden Fagan and Khalil Valentine really out to a good game. But I think the matchup that Illinois needs to exploit is in the secondary. USC secondary has not been very good this season. The Trojans are giving up 231 passing yards per game. That's 3rd most in the conference. Could be a big day for Hank Beatty. Could be a big day for Colin Dixon. And now you kind of put all those facts into a recipe, you put into the oven, what do you get? This could be a game that could produce a lot of offense. And although I think Illinois and Luke Altmaier can do that, that's a game plan and that's a structure of a game that I think fits more into the realm of USC right now. I tend to favor the Trojans getting the victory and Illinois suffering their 2nd consecutive loss. Let's move on to the next game on our schedule. This also in the morning window, the noon window, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights traveling to Minnesota to take on the Golden Gophers. Goldie, 4.5-point favorites in this one. The over-under sits at 51.5. It all goes down Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern on the Big Ten Network. Both teams are coming off their first loss of the season. Of course, Rutgers falling to Iowa on Friday night last week. Minnesota had a bye last week. They fell to Cal in that one, 27-14, I believe the final score was. The main storyline in this one is the return of one Ethan Kaliakmanis to Minneapolis. Boy, Kaliakmanis to Minneapolis. That's a little bit of a word sandwich, a name and a city sandwich there right off the bat in this preview. But the folks in the crowd inside Huntington Bank Stadium are going to look around and see number 16 out there and be like, are we sure that's really Ethan Kaliakmanis? Because when he was here in Minnesota, he didn't look that confident. He didn't look that comfortable. He didn't look that good throwing the football. Ethan looks like a brand new quarterback this year within Rutgers offense. He's got the 2nd most passing yards in the Big Ten, over 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 1 interception. This is a Rutgers passing offense. They want to be able to get that going early. It's so weird to me what we've seen from Rutgers, because when you think about Rutgers in the Greg Schiano era, specifically the last 2 seasons, this is a team that's not talented out there on the perimeter. They don't have good wide receivers, don't have playmakers. And whether it was Gavin Wimsatt or whether it was Ethan last year, they don't have ultra great quarterback play. It's a team that needs to ground and pound and kind of play that tough, physical, classic Big Ten type of style. Right, Kyle Monangai putting up back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons the last 2 years before this one. But it's completely flipped this year for the Scarlet Knights. Now, and that's a big matchup because Minnesota, they've got some good defensive backs. So this is going to be a very interesting matchup. Ethan last week was able to throw for over 300 yards at home against Iowa. How does that translate on the road against a ball-hawking defense like Minnesota? Now, I think an advantage Rutgers has with their passing game is the size that they have at wide receiver. Although their slot guy, D.T. Sheffield, is a little bit shorter at like 5'10", you've got Ian Strong at 6'3". You've got KJ Duff at 6'6". Even their tight end, Kenny Fletcher, there at 6'3". You look at Minnesota's defensive backs, they're averaging right around the 6 foot mark. And a good amount of their corners are below 6 foot. Now, they do have John Nestor, who's there at 6'1", the Iowa transfer, that's starting for the Golden Gophers this season. But a lot of times in that game against Iowa last week, they really wanted to attack the secondary. They felt they had the advantage, and they threw a lot of deep balls, and they tested that part of the Iowa secondary. And when you have bigger body receivers like this, going up against smaller defensive backs, I think what you see is like, hey, just go out there and get it. Use your size to be able to fight off the defender and come down. Let's come down with a 30-yard game. Let's come down with a 40-yard game. If we're running crossers, if we're running slants across the middle, use your strength. Use your size to get in front of the defensive back, catch it, break a tackle, get out in the open field and get us 20 yards. And I think that's something that Rutgers is going to look to certainly take advantage of in this game. But so we know Rutgers is going to be throwing the ball more than they are running the ball. That allows I mentioned the ball hawking secondary for Minnesota. This is a team that had a lot of turnovers last year. Coy Parrish did a fantastic job at baiting quarterbacks into plays and creating some turnovers. You've got Parrish and Kerry Brown back there. If Anthony Smith is a guy that can get pressure consistently, you can kind of shrink the pocket a little bit for Ethan. Watch out for those safeties to create some big plays in Danny Collins' defense. Minnesota has to find ways to get this Rutgers offense out of rhythm, because if you get the passing offense out of rhythm, it gives you a much better chance to win. Later in the game on Friday night against Iowa, I think Iowa adjusted as this game went on, and then you saw, Rutgers didn't put up much offense later in that game, and especially the fourth quarter. Now, Rutgers wants to throw the ball to win. I think Minnesota wants to run the ball to win in this game. Now, Darius Taylor's health is uncertain. He was injured during the Northwestern State game. He did not play against Cal. If Taylor is able to go, I think this provides a big swing for me in favor of the Minnesota Golden Gophers. The Scarlet Knights have surrendered the 4th most rushing yards in the Big Ten this year. Ohio, not Ohio State, Ohio rushed for 200 yards in the opener, over 200 yards. Iowa rushed for 160 last week. In the 9 defensive FEI categories, Rutgers is in triple digits in 7 of them. Once again, kind of like last year, this is not a good Scarlet Knights defense. I think for Minnesota, running the ball well in the early downs, creating favorable situations for quarterback Drake Lindsey is extremely important, especially off of play action. He has a higher completion percentage off of play action than not play action. So if they run the ball well, and I think that they can run the ball well, and that's PJ Fleck football, that physical style of play. If Taylor's not able to go, AJ Turner, Cam Davis, I'm going to butcher this name, Fami Ajijaboy. Okay, that was terrible, but you get the general idea. He's a freshman on this team. And then stopping the run has to be, we talk about Minnesota, has to run the ball. Rutgers has got to do things to be able to stop this run, put the ball more into the hands of Drake Lindsey and see if he can beat you, maybe make him beat you in this ball game. Can the Gophers defense prove themselves? They're the number 1 defense statistically in total defense in the Big Ten. They're number 1 against the run, but they didn't have the best outing against Cal. I think Jaron Kavawi Sangapulitele is a better quarterback, more talented quarterback than Ethan. So how is Ethan going to be able to fare against this defense? I think that's something that really is on my mind headed into this ball game. This is very I would be surprised if this is more than a 10-point spread. If this is more than 10 points, it tells me Rutgers just absolutely lit it up throwing the ball and they stopped the run. And then on the other side, Minnesota just ran the crap out of the ball and they forced some turnovers and really limited the Rutgers passing game. But I think that this is kind of an underrated game, certainly on the Big Ten schedule this week. Let's move on to the mid-afternoon. Why don't we? The number one team in the land, the Ohio State Buckeyes, are 8.5-point road favorites going out to the greatest setting in college football to take on the Washington Huskies. The over-under is 51.5. It all goes down Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS. Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson, and the crew on that call. Now, when I look at both of these rosters, and I will get into this in multiple ways as this preview progresses. When I get into both of these rosters, I'm like, why is this spread 8.5? Ohio State, in almost every facet of the game, is better, bigger, faster, stronger than Washington. What does Vegas know that I don't know? I mean, Ohio State's defense is number one in the country in defensive F+. Matt Patricia has that unit absolutely flying around. They looked awesome against Texas in week number 1 this season. The Ohio State secondary is probably the best in the country, and they're going up against a wide receiver core that really relies on Denzel Boston. Outside of Denzel Boston, it kind of really shrinks a little bit when you talk more about the Huskies. The Buckeyes' defensive line is stout, and they have picked up where they left off last season, even though they've got really an entirely new group. Cade McDonald, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, Bo Atkinson. They have a lot of depth coming off the edge. The offensive tackles for Washington are going to be under duress. They're going to be under stress. That's going to be a really difficult matchup, I believe, for the Huskies in this game. I believe that there are advantages at both lines of scrimmage for Ohio State. And, we know about players like Caleb Downs and this wide receiver core. It just seems like every level of the roster that you go down, Ohio State has the advantage. So I think the odds makers are really leaning into the sold out Husky Stadium atmosphere, that it is going to be loud. It is the first time Ohio State has gone on the road this season. They've got a young quarterback. I think that's where this line exists. If I'm making this line, I tend to favor more 10.5. I favor more of 12.5. This game started around 9.5, and the line has been coming down in favor of the Washington Huskies in this one. So considering that road atmosphere, because when we talk about games like this where it seems like Ohio State has a much more talented roster against a lesser talented roster like Washington, you got to talk about these external factors. You got to talk about these shortcuts. Washington has to be able to get some of these shortcuts against Ohio State. Now, for the Buckeyes, I'll get to Washington here in just a minute. For the Buckeyes, when you have a redshirt freshman quarterback like you have, and he's been extremely efficient. He's got the highest completion percentage rate in the Big Ten Conference right now. You need to get him settled in early in the game. Now, how do you get a young quarterback settled in early in the game? First thing, you can run the football. You can take the heat off of him a little bit. Get that three-headed monster, get Bo Jackson going, get James Peoples going, get C.J. Donaldson going a little bit, really establish that strength of the line of scrimmage. And I think that they certainly do have the advantage at the line of scrimmage for their offensive line against Washington's defensive line. And then those high percentage throws, high efficiency throws, shorter stuff, even though he might be the highest graded quarterback as far as 20+ yard throws down the field. So he's been on the money with the deep ball this season so far at Ohio State. It helps when you have Carnell Tate. It helps when you have Jeremiah Smith, where they can kind of swallow anything near them and make those types of grabs. But I think for Ryan Day, I think for Brian Hartline, just get him comfortable, get him confident, try to cool down this crowd a little bit. I know it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult, I think, throughout the first quarter of this game when it's early to really dial them down considerably. They're going to be hyped. The folks wearing the purple shirts in there, they're going to try to give their squad certainly a home field advantage. So just get Julian into comfortable, high percentage type of situations, and then try to really elaborate down the field from that. As this game goes along and as he gets more comfortable, then you can fire down the field, I think, a little bit more. Now let's talk about Washington a little bit, because the anatomy of an upset in this type of game, I think, really comes down to a couple of things for the Huskies. Can they create explosives? And then can they also stop or prevent explosives? Because I put stop on the graphic. I probably should have put prevent, because you're not going to stop explosive plays when you have the type of personnel that Ohio State has on the offensive side of the football. Look, Washington's offense is centered around three guys: quarterback Damon Williams, running back Jonah Coleman, wide receiver Denzel Boston. You look at how the statistics kind of shake out in terms of who's getting the carries, who's getting the catches, and they certainly tell that story as well. Now, all three of these guys need to have an awesome game. Jonah Coleman needs to go over 100 yards at least. Denzel Boston needs to go over 100 yards at least. Damon Williams needs to probably combine rushing yards and passing yards for 350. 300, 350, something like that. So they all need to have their best game, because when one of these guys doesn't have their best game, it puts more pressure on these other two guys to be able to step up and to be able to really account for that. So if I'm Ohio State, how I want to approach this when I'm defending Washington, I've got a lot of confidence in my defensive line. I mentioned that group, and I mentioned some of the names on that group before. I've got confidence that I can keep Jonah Coleman in check. I think the main thing that I want to do is to be able to take away Denzel Boston, because then at that point you can't create those big explosive plays, be able to down the field. Hey, make Amari Evans beat you. Make some of these other wide receivers beat you, and you've got great corners. I mean, I mentioned it before. This might be the best secondary. You got Davison Igbinosun, you've got Jermaine Matthews, who's really good out there at corner. He played a phenomenal game against Texas earlier on this season. Like, find a way to just take away Denzel Boston, and I think you're sitting pretty, certainly at that point. But we kind of, maybe spin things back for Washington. Creating big plays early is going to really raise the energy of this crowd. So much for Washington, and to be able to hang around as long as they can and try to possibly be able to pull this upset has to do with keeping this energy high in Seattle for as long as they can. Because the longer that this game is close, I feel like the more it drifts towards Washington building confidence and building confidence and building confidence as this game goes on. If I'm Ohio State, I want to get off to a quick start. I want to be able to calm this crowd down a little bit, and I want to hit those strikes as often as I can to really be able to move this thing into the second half where I'm a lot more comfortable. I think you need to be able to scheme up some openings. This Jedd Fisch versus Matt Patricia battle is so intriguing to me. So, because I don't think you put them in a one-on-one matchup, you put these guys in a 7-on-7, Ohio State is going to win these battles 8 or 9 times out of 10. But this is 11-on-11 football, and you need to try to scheme up some openings for Jedd Fisch. However, you can do that to be able to create some plays down the field. And then for Washington, the defense needs to be able to contain the amount of big plays Ohio State is able to create. Washington State threw for 277 yards, a lot of shorter stuff, a lot of non-threatening stuff in the last game for the Huskies defense. Now, I think Washington has some pretty good personnel back there in the secondary. Alex McLaughlin is one of the highest graded Pro Football Focus safeties right now. He had 2 interceptions last week. 1 went back for a touchdown. He needs to stay sound. He needs to stick to his assignments. He can't let anything over the top. And to be honest with you, he probably needs to be a playmaker. Whether it's forcing a fumble, creating a turnover, interception, he needs to be able to make a play in this game. Get extra possessions for the offense. He's been able to do that so far this season. Take possessions away from Ohio State. Certainly, those are things that are an anatomy of an upset. Ephesians Prysock and Tacario Davis on the outside at corner, they can't get beat consistently. It's going to be tough with Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith outside. Now, if they can contain the home run ball from happening in this game, keep everything in front of them, just make a stop. Get off the field on a 3rd and 6. Get off the field on a 3rd and 7. Who knows? Who knows what can happen on that point? Last thing I'll say about this game, the Buckeyes need to keep Damon Williams in check. You have a very electric, you have a very mobile quarterback back there, and this can be an aggressive pass rush for Ohio State. So when you get to those aforementioned 3rd and 7s, you get to those 3rd and 8s, you need to be able to kind of almost have like a controlled pass rush a little bit and know where DeMond is going with the football. Will they spy with some of their guys in the middle, someone like an Arvell Reese in the middle of that defense, a Sonny Styles? We'll see. Maybe some of the more athletic players at the second level of that defense. So they don't allow, especially on some of those 3rd downs, so they don't allow him to kind of keep the chains moving down the field, because I mean, you could see a situation where Ohio State is great in coverage. The defensive line is getting upfield a lot, but if DeMond can continuously escape and find those run lanes, that could keep Washington going down the field, certainly in a positive direction. Look, I think Ohio State has a big-time advantage roster-wise in this game. There's some people picking an upset. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Could it be close? Yeah, it could be close, but still, 8.5 is a line that has me kind of thinking, shaking my head a little bit. I think the Buckeyes win, and I think the Buckeyes probably cover the spread in this game. Let's move on to a game that's very interesting to me. The 11th ranked Indiana Hoosiers are 7.5-point favorites. They go on the road to Iowa City to battle the black and gold of the Hawkeyes. The over-under in this game is 48.5. Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, streaming exclusively on Peacock, which I'm sure everybody loves to hear. Let's go back in the time machine a little bit, because there are some similarities to this 2025 meeting and the last time that these two teams tangled on the gridiron. In 2021, Indiana was coming off of that fantastic 2020 season, and they had a quarterback by the name of Michael Penix Jr. Yes, that Michael Penix Jr. was quarterback in Indiana in week 1. Remember when the Big Ten played conference games? In week 1, this was the first week of coverage ever in Big Ten TED history. So if you go to the YouTube channel, you click videos, you click oldest, it's going to be one that's kind of towards the top. So go check that out if you've got some time. That'll be a fun little exercise with this game this week. Michael Penix threw 3 interceptions that week, and Iowa rolled 2 pick sixes, both from Mr. Riley Moss. Indiana was coming in with an explosive offense, and Iowa forced a lot of turnovers. Yeah, that probably sounds like a pretty good game plan for the Hawkeyes at Kinnick on Saturday against this Indiana offense, because, man, how Indiana played against Illinois on Saturday night, they just looked like a machine. They just looked unstoppable, because they were unstoppable in that game against the Illini. They did whatever they wanted to do. 579 yards of total offense. The ball barely hit the ground. Fernando Mendoza, 21 of 23 for 5 touchdowns. I think there could be more matchup problems for Indiana throwing the ball against an Iowa secondary that over these last 2 years has not been as good as they were maybe in the previous couple of years. Because when I look around at Iowa's secondary, they don't have that superstar that can make plays. They don't have like a Riley Moss that I mentioned at the beginning of this preview. They don't have a Cooper DeJean. They don't have a Sebastian Castro. Like, they have a Xavier Wampa back there, over there at safety. But you got guys like Zach Lutmer, TJ Hall, and Deshaun Lee that in some of these games, not only in this game last week against Rutgers, we'll talk about that here in just a minute, but even last year, games against like Michigan State where they were able to hit big plays down the field, and Iowa State as well. I know some of those guys are new, but you had TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee in that secondary last season. They just don't look as athletic as they have before. They just don't look as good defending the pass and preventing some of these big plays down the field. That's kind of what they were known for. Iowa, hey, let's just keep everything in front of us and let's tackle well. But now things are getting over the top on this Iowa secondary as it stands. Iowa gave up 330 yards to Rutgers last week. Okay? Ethan Kaliakmanis was able to hit a lot down the field against this Iowa secondary. And if Rutgers was able to do that, and I think Rutgers is a pretty good passing offense right now in the Big Ten, but Indiana, I think, can certainly have a lot of success. What about Indiana's rushing offense? They've been getting big chunk yardage in their first couple of games against a lesser quality of opponent, and then, of course, last week against Illinois. Iowa's defense, I will say this, it presents the biggest challenge for IU. Look, we're not setting an extremely high bar. It's Illinois, and that's it. Sorry, Kennesaw State. Sorry, some of these other teams that you played earlier on in the season. You got Aaron Graves up the middle on the defensive line. You got Carson Sharar, who's a linebacker that has kind of waited his turn at Iowa, and that's now getting a big-time chance right there. Iowa's defensive line, they need to play an elite game. Okay, here's the thing about Indiana's offense. If you make them one-dimensional either way, right, both dimensions are pretty good. The run game and the pass game. But right now, I think for Iowa, if you're able to keep this run game in check, and then you allow guys like an Ethan Hurkett and a Max Llewellyn to win battles off the edge and maybe shrink the pocket against Fernando Mendoza and get him a little bit off schedule. Indiana's offense is very timing based. When it's on, it is on, and you need to try to get it a little bit off kilter a little bit. Fernando Mendoza's completion percentage drops from 80 to 55% when under pressure. So if Iowa can consistently generate that against IU's pass protection, that gives them a chance. I believe that's the game plan. Stop the run, get a little bit of pressure on Fernando Mendoza, and then let's see what happens. Maybe they can force some turnovers or something like that. So how Indiana, I believe, needs to play this game out on the perimeter. I think if they want to take control of this game early at Kinnick, for Iowa, they need to be able to win this game in the trenches. Iowa right now is third in the Big Ten against the run, giving up just 60 yards per game. So that kind of goes into what I said before about stopping the run. They've been really good, and they've played Iowa State. They've played Rutgers. Like they've played a Big Ten team and a Big 12 team. So it's not like they're playing a bunch of patsies right now. They've been very good against the run. Indiana's top three backs are averaging 7 yards per carry. Iowa probably needs to bring that number around 3. Prevent the explosive runs, tackle well in space. I think that's as big. That's why I keep on saying it. That's why I'm making such a big point out of this, because I think it's as big of a emphasis as any coming into this game, I believe, for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Get Indiana into those obvious passing downs and then let her rip and see what happens. Defensive backs hang on tight, and maybe they can make a couple of plays throughout this game. When we talk about the other side of the ball, Iowa has the highest graded Pro Football Focus run blocking offensive line right now in the Big Ten. So certainly establishing that is going to be big in a variety of ways, right? It keeps that explosive Indiana offense on the field, or on the sideline, I should say, off the field, on the sideline. It kind of keeps them over there, and it kind of chews the clock a little bit. And that's exactly where you need to get Mark Gronowski in rhythm a little bit. Look, Mark's not going to be a guy that's going to light up the stat sheet. Mark's not going to be a guy that's going to light up the scoreboard. But you need to get him some confidence early and a little bit of balance early in this game. Indiana had 7 sacks last week. You need to keep guys like Mario Landino and Mikhail Kamara from creating third and longs for this offense. Running the ball well on first down, getting to a manageable second down, get into those third and shorts. If you get to third down, if and when you get to third down, I think has to be the offensive game plan for Tim Lester. Run game got to be successful with Kamari Moulton, with Jazz Patterson, and the stable of backs, Terrell Washington, Xavier Williams, right? They got a good amount of them that have had success running the ball so far this season. So it comes down to stylistic play for me, where I think Iowa is gritty going up against the gorgeous right now for Indiana. I think for Iowa to pull the upset, you need to play this game in a phone booth. You need to play that classic Iowa game, and I've kind of laid it out. You need to dominate the line of scrimmage. You need to chew the clock. You need to finish drives. You need to force turnovers. It's going to be a tall task. This is an Indiana football team, but weird things happen, man. Weird things happen in Kinnick Stadium. I'll certainly say that. For Indiana, you need to make this game look absolutely beautiful. You need to make this game look gorgeous, because if you go up and down the field and you're executing your offense to a high level, Iowa, plain and simple, they can't score with you. They cannot match your offense tick for tack if you're playing that way. This is going to be a fun game. Can Indiana respond with an equally impressive offensive performance? I don't think they're going to score 63 points on Iowa. I just want to make sure I say that right now. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a pushback, certainly a bigger test for IU to really see where they are. Is this a potential letdown spot and an upset spot for Kirk Ferentz to pull some Iowa magic? It's certainly going to be fun to see. Now, let's move on to our next game. And here's what I'll say about the next game. I'm probably not going to say a lot about this game because these are two of the teams in the Big Ten that are more towards the bottom. But it is still adds some intrigue. It's still going to be a fun game to watch, I think. The UCLA Bruins go to the Lake to take on the Northwestern Wildcats, the Purple Cats, 6.5-point favorites in this game. The over-under 44.5. It all goes down Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on the Big Ten Network. Of course, Deshaun Foster got fired a couple of weeks ago after that just embarrassing loss to New Mexico. You got a new coach, interim coach coming in there in Tim Skipper, who, by the way, he was the interim coach last season when Jeff Tedford resigned over there at Fresno State. He got them to a 6-6 record. He got them to a bowl game. Is this like too tough to be able to get these guys on the right track in a 2-week time frame? Is there a give-up factor for UCLA? How much of a fire does a new coach really light under you? I mean, this is still the same coaching staff. This is still the same guys. It's just a new voice leading your program. I'm really intrigued to see what kind of fight UCLA has in this game against the Wildcats out there near Chicago. For Northwestern, look, I could talk about Preston Stone a little bit. And yeah, of course, he needs to have quarterback needs to have a good game to be successful. No doubt about that. But for Northwestern, the key is simple. Just run the damn ball. I mean, you got a tremendous advantage. A lot of teams are going to have a tremendous advantage running the ball on this porous UCLA run defense. They allow the most rushing yards in the Big Ten, 244 a game. New Mexico rushed for 298 yards. That just doesn't sound right because of how good that this UCLA defense was against the run last year. They were one of the best defenses in the conference against the run. It's taken a complete 180 this season. UCLA football as a whole has taken a complete 180 this season. Northwestern's like middle of the road in the conference as far as running the ball, but they do have a big offensive line that can move defenders. An earlier game this year against Oregon, they had a little bit of success creating a push on the offensive line. Certainly not every drive, but they had enough of success where you certainly noticed it when you were watching this game, and that's, I think, what Zach Lujan, the offensive coordinator for the Wildcats, is going to look to do. Joseph Hyman is more of an electric shiftier back, and then Caleb Komalafe is more of the power back now with Cam Porter out for the season. Just keep feeding these guys. You'll create big plays. You'll create explosive plays. You'll get chunk plays in the run game if you just stick with it. And I think that's what Northwestern is going to want to do in this game. For UCLA, look, this is a team that lacks a lot of confidence right now. And I would probably venture to guess that Nico Imaliava also lacks a lot of confidence right now. He sees all the stuff that went on during the offseason. You see what's happened in the first 3 games for UCLA, and then you turn around, you see the success that Joey Aguilar is having over there at Tennessee. There's not a lot about to be confident right now. So for UCLA, you need to get him going early, whether it's the short stuff, whether it's the medium stuff. Get Quasi Gilmer going, get Mikey Matthews going. Just get some semblance of confidence early in this game, because if Northwestern is just able to jam it down your throat, drive after drive after drive, and you're going 3 and out and you're inefficient, you're going to lose that confidence. You're going to lose maybe any fire that you had coming into this game from a new coach taking over and a new voice and a new vision. You're going to lose that pretty quickly if that's kind of the way you start offensively for the Bruins. I mean, UCLA's offensive line allowed 4 sacks against Utah. They've allowed 6 sacks so far this season. That's a group that hasn't fared well. Northwestern has 2 good guys coming off the edge, Aiden Hubbard and Anto Saka. They can create trouble. So whether it just get rid of the football quickly, get consecutive completions, get some sort of confidence going early, I think is where this thing goes. But I tend to lean Northwestern, really playing that tough, gritty, Big Ten type of style. I mean, UCLA, man, I don't know. I don't know where they're going to win a game. This is just a tough situation right now for the boys down there in Westwood. We got one game left. And I think you know which game it is. This game has it all. The 6th-ranked Oregon Ducks going on the road to Happy Valley to battle the 3rd-ranked Nittany Lions of Penn State. The blue and white are 3.5-point favorites. The over-under sits at 51.5. It is a whiteout Saturday night. Big Ten Saturday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC. Noah Eagle, Todd Blackledge, Catherine Tappan, and the crew will be on the call for this matchup. Folks, this is as good as it gets. This is the main event of this show. This is the main event for the Big Ten football Saturday. It is a Big Ten championship rematch. It is James Franklin versus Dan Lanning. You've got the top 2 teams that are number 1 and number 2 in drive success rate. You've got strengths, and you've got NFL players all over the football field. This is one of the most anticipated matchups This is one of the most anticipated showdowns of not only the Big Ten football season, but the entire country. The entire nation will have their eyes on this matchup. Oregon has started the season just on fire. Who cares that a lot of their production from 2024 went to the NFL, not on the team anymore? They've replaced it with really high caliber talent right now. And, you put up 59 on Montana State, you put up 69 on Oklahoma State, you take care of business against Northwestern, you win 41-7 over your rival in Oregon State. They're looking, when you talk about eye test, Oregon is passing the eye test at a higher rate than almost any team right now in college football. But then you look at Penn State, and they haven't really played much of anybody. You look at FIU, you look at Villanova. I can't even remember who their other opponent was on their schedule, but they kind of remind me a little bit like the start to their season, a lot like that 2023 Michigan team. I think J.J. McCarthy in like the first game threw a couple of interceptions, and they were against like, man, we got to get this thing going a little bit. We got to get this engine humming a little bit. Come on, let's get this thing off the runway a little bit. And then you saw them play some significant games against some Big Ten teams, and I think they got the juice up a little bit. And then you started to see them be a lot more impressive. And maybe that's what the deal with this Penn State team is. We don't know. Maybe they are going to, maybe the problems, or maybe them not being as impressive, maybe that's going to show up in this game against Oregon. There's so many things you can break down when you have a matchup game like this. But I think the ultimate matchup is Penn State's power versus Oregon's speed. How is each team going to be able to dictate the way that this game is going to be played? Let's start first with power. And I just want to say this. I'm not saying that Penn State can't push the ball down the field. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. I'll get more on that as this preview progresses. I'm not saying that Oregon can't run the football and be ultra physical up front against Penn State. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say both these teams, I believe, are going to try to dictate the way. Penn State running the football, Oregon creating explosive plays, maybe through the air. Let's start first with the Nittany Lions. We know they want to play power football, like with Nick Dawkins, Anthony Donkow, the tackles Nolan Rucci, and Drew Shelton. There's a ton of experience up front. There's a lot of size. These are guys that can push people around. It is a big group. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in the backfield. Allen averaging 8 yards per carry. Singleton leading the team in touchdowns. Of course, everything is going to go. When you talk about a Big Ten championship rematch, Penn State was able to really utilize their power. Even in a losing effort last year, they were really able to utilize their power and do really well in the run game. They rushed for 297 yards. And that's been an emphasis for Oregon defensively all offseason to get better against the run. That's really motivated them. And now coming into this game, they're going to be really motivated, considering what happened last year, to get better and to be able to hold this Penn State run game in check. And they need to be able to hold this Penn State run game in check, I think, to be able to have success. I think Penn State wants to be able to slow the tempo down in this game. Oregon is really explosive. They are a really efficient offense. They're the number one offense in the country, according to a ton of F+, FEI, SP+, those types of rankings and those types of ratings right now. So if Penn State can just chew the clock, if they can kind of take a page out of like what happened like the Northwestern, there was a drive or two where they were able to chew the clock and maybe have some success running the football against Oregon. If they can do that, that really fits into the way that they want to play, I believe, in this game. Oregon defensively, their defensive line, they need to be able to shed blocks. Like, they got big guys up front. This is it for Penn State. This is going to be a big challenge for them. Amari Washington, like 6'4", 336. You've got Terrence Green and Teon Gray that are in the defensive line rotation that are all plus 330. Bear Alexander are a little bit smaller. He's sitting there, I think, right around like 305, 310, somewhere in that area. But this is a big defensive line. I'm really curious to see how much of a consistent push that Penn State can have. Like if Penn State's offensive line can engage, push, get to that second level, that sets up their ability to create some explosive runs. Oregon needs to be able to push. They need to be, at the very least, they need to be able to create a stalemate. But, man, shedding those blocks is going to go a long way to keeping this rushing offense under 150, under 170. If Oregon is able to keep Penn State under like 150 rushing yards in this game, I think you got to feel really good of where Oregon is playing right now. And then on the other side for the Ducks, I think that this is Tracktown USA, obviously. I think that they want to turn this into a track meet. I think they feel really confident in their explosiveness on offense. They feel really confident. We're going to talk more about Dante Moore and these quarterbacks in just a little bit, but Dante Moore is probably the most talented quarterback in the country. Will he be the best quarterback in the country? If he wins this game, I think a lot of people might look at him right now as the best quarterback in all of college football. I mean, you got a super frosh Decorian Moore on the outside. Malik Benson has been fantastic. We know what Kenyon Sadiq did in this matchup last year, scoring 2 touchdowns in the Big Ten championship game. They've just got matchup advantages, I think, all over the field. Now, Penn State does have a pretty good secondary. They have a deep secondary. Guys like A.J. Harris, Zakee Wheatley and company back there. So Oregon hasn't really faced a secondary like this. I think that's pretty fair to say. That's certainly not creating too much controversy out there. So just how much can Oregon separate? I have a lot of confidence in Will Stein that he's going to be able to scheme up a lot of separation to be able to create some openings for this passing offense. But if they're moving the ball down the field consistently, and they're scoring, they're putting a lot of pressure on Penn State to be able to respond to their scoring drives with scoring drives of their own from the blue and white. That's not the world that Penn State wants to live in. Can they compete in it? Maybe. I just feel better for the Nittany Lions right now if they're playing a more physical style of play and keeping Oregon's offense on the sidelines. I will say this about Oregon, their passing game, and creating big plays down the field. They need their offensive tackles to put up or shut up. They need them to play a fantastic game. Isaiah World and Alex Harkey have been a little bit inconsistent. Oh, wait a minute, Ted. They've only allowed 1 sack this season. Break down the film a little bit. You watch it. There's people that I listen to, that I watch involving these two teams that have played offensive line through their careers. Landon Tengwall has a great college football show out there. Jeff Schwartz does some great work. A former Oregon offensive lineman that works for the Ducks Rising Collective and has a film room thing with them. So, and both of these guys have said about Isaiah World that he kind of lacks anchor, right? To be able to get his ass down and to be able to play with leverage a little bit and then punch. At 6'8", maybe it's a little bit more difficult for him to be able to get down. He's played against lower level, defensive linemen and edge rushers, and they've gotten into it. They've gotten into his chest a little bit and pushed him back. You've got a powerful edge rusher for Penn State like Denai Dennis Sutton. I mean, lately they just produce first-round pick after first-round pick after first-round pick. Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter, and then you guy who played at linebacker at Penn State and Micah Parsons, who now might be the best edge rusher in the National Football League. So, and you got Chaz Coleman as well. So those guys need to be able to hold up. You need to give Dante more time to let all of these concepts to be able to develop down the field. If Dante does not have time to get the ball to Decorian, to get the ball to Sadiq, to get the ball to Malik Benson and all these other guys, that I think takes away a big portion, I believe, of what Oregon wants to do. And Oregon, and the advantage, I should probably say, of what Oregon has, I think, throughout this football game as well. But I will say this. I have more confidence maybe in Oregon that can do both sides of the coin, so to speak, where they can create explosive plays in the passing game, but they can also run the ball. I mean, Zane Durant is a guy who's been playing here at Penn State for a while, a little bit undersized at 6'1", 287 pounds. Iapani Lalaolu, the center for Oregon, Emmanuel Pregnon, those are big guys up front. I think there's a possibility that they could create some run lanes for Noah Whittington coming off of an injury, maybe have more balance in this offense than Penn State. When I look at the Nittany Lions throwing the ball down the field, Drew Aller has not pushed the ball down the field like at all this season. I'll get more into that when I talk about this quarterback battle. And then we know about the wide receivers. Okay, I believe that they've upgraded over last season, but these are some corners for Oregon that are big, they are physical, they are athletic, but they also have not been very tested this season. This is just a Penn State team. They don't really stretch the ball down the field a ton right now. That kind of leads me, let's talk about quarterbacks right now. This is Dante versus Drew. These are two of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. These are two of the best quarterbacks in the entire country right now. But I'm going to say this. I think Dante Moore is the better quarterback. I think when you talk about skill, when you talk about projecting higher at the NFL level, I think without question it's Dante. Now, he needs to be able to prove it against a good team. You look at Drew Aller over the years, he's maybe, in some of these games against Ohio State and some of these other. No, there's been a few games. Last year in the Big Ten Championship, I thought he played a pretty good game. Remember last year against USC, he put the team on his back and carried them to a victory in that matchup. But most of the time in these big games, Notre Dame is another example where they didn't complete a pass to a wide receiver. A lot of times in these big-time matchups, Drew Aller doesn't exactly play his best to be able to lift his team to a victory. Dante needs to be able to prove that. So that's a very interesting matchup that I believe is at stake right now. Dante's completing 75% of his passes. Drew is completing 65% of his passes. And Dante's probably played better competition so far this season. I believe all of the pressure in this game is on Drew Aller. You're at home in a whiteout, high expectations. You're coming off of a bye, so you have more time to prepare for what Oregon has on film. And maybe let's be honest, considering Penn State's schedule, they've probably been watching a little bit of Oregon film every single week, but definitely they've had 2 weeks to prepare, whereas Oregon has had 1 week to prepare. But on the flip side, Oregon is a younger team, okay? And getting the more reps, getting that experience, I think, really plays more into their favor. If I'm Oregon, I would rather have that. And if I'm Penn State, I'd probably rather have the bye. So I think both teams scheduling-wise are in the place that they want to be able to be. With all the pressure on Drew, I think Dante's going to go out there. He's going to be loose. All right, we're the underdog. There's people out there that are picking Penn State. They're siding with the experience and all that. Let's let her rip. Let her rip was the theme for Oregon against Oklahoma State. And for Will Stein and Dante Moore in this offense, I think they're just going to let it rip. And that goes into what I said at the beginning of this preview. They're going to look to get explosive. They're going to look to take shots down the field. Because if they know if they're successful on offense, Penn State's not going to be able to keep up. They're not going to be able to keep up, plain and simple, in this game. Oregon, the number one offense in the country, a lot of metrics. I said that before. They're just playing at an extremely high efficiency level. They can do so many things in so many personnel packages. They can show a lot. And I will say this about Drew, since we're talking about quarterbacks. I think Tosh Lupoi is gonna try to confuse Drew a little bit, showing something pre-snap, something else post-snap, throwing a ton of coverages. They already throw a ton of coverages at the wall, and they're going to throw everything they have in this game at Drew Aller. And they're going to challenge him to be able to decipher what they're doing and to be able to make the right decisions and not make any mistakes throughout this matchup. So it's going to be a very fun quarterback battle to see which guy has the bigger performance on the bigger stage. Now, remember last year's game for Oregon against Ohio State? That was a big-time matchup. A lot like this is a big-time matchup where you had Autzen Stadium provide a huge home field advantage. A lot of people said that we're at that game. It was the best home field that they've ever seen at Autzen Stadium, the loudest they've ever heard Autzen Stadium. And it was worth a lot. And I think that's maybe what put Oregon over the edge in that game. How much is the whiteout worth? How much can Beaver Stadium create an advantage? For Penn State, you need to get those TFLs early, a 3-and-out, some big runs. The crowd is going to be super juiced to start this game. You need to keep them going in that direction as long as you possibly can. Like for Penn State, it's all about keeping that momentum as high as possible so you can keep the crowd energy for as high as possible and as long as possible, I believe, throughout this game. I think if both of these teams match up on a neutral field, I think Oregon is probably a more talented team. And a lot like last year when they met up on a neutral field, that Oregon wins this game. But here's the thing, folks. It's early in the season, and it's in Happy Valley, Pennsylvania. I tend to lean Penn State. In this game. But before I kind of finish off that thought, Dante Moore has been really poised this season. He's been really comfortable in the offense, but he's never had a game like this. What happens if something doesn't go right a couple of series in a row? What happens if maybe they're not efficient as they have been in some of these games? How does Dante respond in this type of environment? Does he stay calm? Does he stay collected throughout the matchup? That's something that I've got my eye on. Big time proving ground for Dante as far as that's concerned. But getting back to my feeling on this game, the home crowd is going to play a huge advantage for the Nittany Lions. I got a feeling that Penn State edges are going to have a successful They're going to win that battle against Oregon's offensive line in this game. Maybe make things a little bit more difficult for Oregon to be able to throw the ball down the field. Can Penn State run the ball consistently? We're going to see. To me, this has all the makings of a lot like last year for Oregon, where the home team wins this matchup game. And then if these two teams match up later on in the season on a neutral field, where Oregon gets more experience, and I already said that they probably have the talent advantage, then maybe the Ducks come out on top at that point. So I tend to favor the blue and white of the Nittany Lions, but this is going to be an amazing matchup on Saturday night. And it is going to be an amazing week of Big Ten football. You are all caught up. You are all previewed up here on this edition of Big Nation. So I'll be back doing some reactions on Saturday, and then I'll be back on Monday to wrap up everything that was Week 5 within the Big Ten Conference. So until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.